The Australian Financial Review.
I was really worried when I was young that I didn't know what I wanted to do. You know, I did a music degree, I went to India and did some teaching for a while, I came back, I worked in a school. The messaging I was always getting was that I was kind of like behind the 8 ball. And I actually look back and I am so glad now that I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Hi, I'm Sally Patton, editor of Boss from the Australian Financial Review. And welcome to 15 Minutes with the Boss, a podcast about success and failure and everything in between. And along the way, we're hoping to get some great advice from our leaders. My guest today is Holly Masters, the Chief Executive of the McGrath Foundation. Hi, Holly, how are you?
Hi, Sally. So good to be with you. As a consequence, I went from running
Thank
a
you so much for coming in. Now, Holly, as I said, you're the CEO of the McGrath Foundation. The McGrath Foundation was founded in 2005 by Australian cricketing great Glenn McGrath and has supported over 150,000 people and their families through cancer. Last year, you raised just over $46 million. And in January this year at the Pink Test at the cricket, you announced that you are extending care to beyond breast cancer to include people who have other forms of cancer. And I must say that I was reading the other day that 1 in 2 Australians can expect to contract cancer in their lifetime. So that's a lot of help that you can provide.
It's a big goal for us. Our initial target was to get to 250 McGrath breast care nurses, and we did that last November. And now we're at the bottom of a very big mountain that we need to climb. But we do it one step at a time. And knowing that 1 in 2 will be affected by cancer, it means that there's an enormous amount of work for us. It's taken us 20 years to get to 250 breast care nurses. We don't want it to take another 20 years for us to get to the number of McGrath cancer care nurses that we're going to need.
So what is the Pink Test?
The Pink Test happens every year. It is also known as the New Year's Test and existed long before it was the Pink Test. And it is the cricketing test that happens at the SCG at the very start of January every year. Now, the January after Jane died, the cricketing community really rallied round, and there was this idea that came up with Cricket Australia and the SCG that they wanted to have this moment at the New Year's Test. Day 3 was designated Jane McGrath Day. From that year, it has grown enormously.
And Jane McGrath died of breast cancer.
Yes, she did. And in fact, she had a nurse at that point, and she realised the difference that having a breast care nurse made. So when the foundation was set up, she and Glenn defined that it would be focused on providing breast care nurses and doing the professional development to support them.
What an amazing legacy. And I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about that as we chat. On that note, our 15 minutes will start now. We haven't got much time. Let's get going. My first question is your morning routine. What time do you get up? What happens?
So I normally get up somewhere between 5:30. I like to exercise in the morning. I've always been a morning person. I've still got a lot of family in the UK. So quite often I'll go for a 10K walk and I'll just do a walk and talk. Alternatively, I might do a Pilates class or go to the gym. After I've done that, whether I'm working at home, which I normally do 2 days a week, 3 days in the office, I'm normally in the office by about 7:30 or so. At 9 o'clock, we have our team morning huddle. So the entire exec team meets for 15 minutes. So the 7 of us are all together online and we have a routine.
So what do you discuss in those 15 minutes at the beginning of the day?
Each of us have 3 things. You have to express either a moment of gratitude or learning from the last 24 hours. You have to describe what's your big rock today. So what's the big thing that you're going to do today that's going to shift the strategy of the organisation? And the third is, what help do you need from the group? And those 3 things every single day make sure that we stay on track from a strategic point of view, but we also address any issues that we've got in that moment and move things quickly.
So you say that you'll have to express something that you're grateful for. Do you all express something different every day? And is that very hard to do?
Well, that's why, actually, it's why we introduce the moment of learning, because if you're doing it every single day, it can feel a bit clunky and it needs to feel very natural. And of course, we're a really diverse exec team. So, somebody might be joyous about Liverpool winning the soccer last night. But others might talk about a conversation they've had with a colleague or a peer, which has been really vulnerable and revelatory. And so it can be incredibly meaningful through to something that's really quite light.
Right. Excellent. I love that. Okay. My next question is, what is a pivotal moment in your career that you would point to, say a project that you've undertaken or a promotion that you have been given that changed the trajectory of what you were doing?
Probably the moment that has really offered me like just the most enormous fundamental change in direction, but also impact, was the decision to join the McGrath Foundation. I was first approached about this role when I was finishing up a 3-year stint in Hong Kong, running a very big prestige beauty brand across 14 countries, traveling 220 nights a year, managing a massive business with thousands of employees. And I was trying to make a decision, do I want to do one more big corporate gig before I moved into a for-purpose? And this job came along. And as a consequence, I went from running $1 billion organization, thousands of people, to a $15 million turnover, not-for-profit in Australia, at that point with about 40 people and about 110 nurses. Big shift, but the opportunity to be able to drive systemic change in the health system and genuinely be able to have impact, it was an extraordinary opportunity, and I'm exceptionally grateful.
Had you lived in Australia before?
Yes. So I moved to Australia in 2005. My husband's Australian. We met in London. Classic story, got married in London and then moved here in 2005. But in 2014, we both moved to Hong Kong with our roles. We were both in APAC roles. Funnily enough, when I took the job in Hong Kong, which was an internal move within the Estee Lauder companies where I was working prior, when I took that job, I was actually called about the McGrath Foundation CEO role at that point. But that was the previous CEO recruitment that they were doing. And at the time I said, I would love that this might be in my future, but I don't feel like I have enough skills yet to be able to give it my all.
So what is the gap in experience that you thought you needed?
I think I felt I hadn't had enough diversity in terms of cultural experience, different business models from different markets. I'd operated businesses and run businesses across Australia and New Zealand, but the opportunity to do that and be exposed to global strategy, globally working with very senior people in the business. I was reporting into one of the Lauder family. And I think it was almost also just being in the chair for a bit longer. You know, I felt relatively young. I'd come into that role a little bit later because I'd also had such diversity in my career earlier on. So I think it was bit of general experience, but also exposure to lots of different ways of thinking.
Okay. My next question is, what is the best piece of career advice you've ever been given?
Gosh, I've been given such beautiful nuggets, but I think probably the one that has been really resonant with me for such a long time is to open every door and have every conversation, because you never know where it will lead. And that has been very valuable. I think every single role that I have accepted has come about as a result of somebody I've had a conversation with.
A headhunter or a friend, or who has that? What type of person has that person been?
The example behind this role was that a girlfriend of mine who I had worked with in retail had been approached by the headhunter for the CEO role of the McGrath Foundation. She knew it wasn't for her. She had other plans. She called me and she said, I think you would be perfect. Would you mind if I put your name forward? I said, I would be delighted. I quite often mentor younger women leaders. And I always say to them, open every door and have every conversation, because you don't know what you don't know. And you don't know who knows who. And actually, it's a very small place. And I don't mean Australia, I mean the world. In my old industry, in the beauty retail, everyone knows everybody else. And so building out that network and really understanding where you might fit and where your skills might be best placed is a really smart thing to do.
On that note, Holly, don't go away. We're going to take a short break, but we're going to come back and open our delightful chatterbox. Welcome back to 15 Minutes with the Boss. I'm here with Holly Masters, the Chief Executive of the McGrath Foundation. Now, Holly.
I'm slightly worried about this.
Yes, exactly. Let's start laughing about this. This is a beautiful chatterbox. Inside which are about 15 questions. I'm going to ask you to have a bit of a shuffle around, pick them out one by one, and we'll play the chatterbox game. Thank you. What's the most underrated skill that has helped you in your career?
I think I have a very long-term view and a bit of blind faith. One of the things that's helped me to be really resilient in some really challenging environments and working with some tough people in the past is that I'm not just about what needs to be done today. I have a very long-term view about where I think an organisation might need to go.
So when you came into the McGrath Foundation, did you come in with a very long-term view of where you thought the foundation needed to go?
One of the most exciting things when I was interviewing my chair, John Condy, and Glenn, was they said, we've got 2 jobs for you. The first is we're growing double digit, but the need for nurses is growing faster than we are. So we need you to accelerate the business. For me, that's a 2-3 year job. The second piece was the super interesting part. What they said is, we want you to help us define what the foundation should stand for in 10 years.
So how did you go about setting that 10-year vision? Did you have that immediately or did you have to work at that? And if so, how did you work at that?
So first step was to make sure that we got that first sort of 2 to 3 year growth strategy in place, nice audit of the business. During that audit, I was really looking at what's unique to us, what might help take us forward and really make sure that in the future, the McGrath Foundation is not just known because of Glenn and his family and Jane, but is known because of what it does. And what I realised was that our McGrath model of care was totally unique and could be translated into multiple different ways. So we started a process where we worked with an external provider who helped interview a whole range of people about which directions we could go into. And in the end, what we realised was about 80 to 90% of what our nurses do is entirely transferable to other tumour streams, and in fact, potentially to other chronic diseases. We started this conversation 6.5 years ago, but the reality is the insight is actually a retail insight because it goes back to a white label proposition.
I'll explain that.
A white label proposition in retail is where you might be a developer of a product, a manufacturer of a product, and you might also do wholesale manufacturing for another brand. So effectively, you invest in the R&D, you're able to do the manufacturing, but somebody else's label goes on it. So I was looking at our nurses in the first instance saying, you know what, actually, we could run nursing services for other organisations, or we could do their professional development, and we could do it in a way which they're raising money for, they own it, it's their brand, it's their community, but we could do it effectively and efficiently because we've got all the resources already. And that was the first kind of insight as to could we make it work in that way.
That is a very interesting way that you've been able to transfer skills from retail to the McGrath Foundation, which on the outset look completely different organisations.
And you know what? They're actually very similar because in a prestige luxury brand, retail brand, you are building customer relationships, you are running events and engagement, and you are building a reputation and a brand. And actually, that's exactly what we do. Effectively, our nurses, we are training and developing them to build out those relationships and make sure they're very personalised, ongoing, supportive relationships. We prepare all their professional development to make sure that they're fit to be able to do that. We run lots of events and activities. Pink Test is a perfect example. And building the brand and making sure that it is trusted, that is the way to make sure that people will give us money. You wouldn't get it on the outside necessarily, but on the inside, very similar.
No, it's amazing. I love that. Okay, Holly, have another fish. Thank you. What's your favourite podcast or streaming show and why?
To be honest, I don't actually listen to a lot of podcasts.
Why not?
Because I love to listen to music. So I often exercise outside. For me, being in nature is really calming. So I love to walk and listen to music. It's something that's really, if I'm not talking to family back home.
And what type of music?
Oh, it's really mixed. I was doing a deep dive into Jamiroquai this weekend. That was otherwise. But I'm also a massive fan of Bach, love, honestly, a whole range of things. And it kind of depends on my mood, but also what pace I want to walk or run. So I pick things that make sense for my mood, etc. But there has been one book that for me has been really impactful in the last few years, and that's James Clear's Atomic Habits, which, you know, when you're thinking about driving really systemic change, but you need to break it down into little steps every single day and help people understand their role, what they are doing every single day is contributing towards that bigger picture. There's nothing better than what he talks about in Atomic Habits. Plus, it also comes out of crisis and real challenge. And I think that's a great message also in our world.
Yeah, I love it. And I also love that book. Okay, have another fish. Let's go. Thank you. If you could give a TED Talk today on a topic that was not related to business, what would it be?
I think I would like to give a TED talk about not feeling like you have to understand what you're going to do from a career in your teens or even in your 20s. I was really worried when I was young that I didn't know what I wanted to do. You know, I did a music degree. I went to India and did some teaching for a while. I came back. I worked in a school. I then worked in agency land. I was trying to work out what I wanted to do. And the messaging I was always getting was that I was kind of like behind the 8 ball, you know? Lots of people were really clear about their vocations. And I actually look back and I am so glad now that I didn't know what I wanted to do. Because as a consequence, I've had a really broad base. I'm a generalist. I'm not a specialist. I completely know where my gaps are. But I think so many of us at an early stage are just kind of frozen by this sense of, I should know. And why don't I know?
So what would you say to someone in their early 20s or even early 30s who just still does not know what they want to do?
First thing I'd say is, it doesn't matter. A career can change shape at any time. You know, that you can make a decision tomorrow and go in a completely different direction. The first is, don't feel like you need to rush into something. I think lots of people accept roles because they feel like they should take a job. And there is real value in exploring different roles. But it comes back to that open every door, have every conversation, because actually there's so much value in talking to other people. I quite often talk to women leaders about when they're looking for the next role, basically having a coffee with lots of different people and saying to them, how do you view me? What do you think is one of the greatest skills or values that I could bring to an organisation? Because it's extraordinary how people will reflect that back to you. They love to be asked, first of all, because you're valuing their opinion. But it gives you a kaleidoscope of the way different people view you. And I think that really helps to kind of recognise, actually, there is a whole range of different paths that I could take, particularly when you talk to people about their careers. I think at least diffusing that, so you take the stress away from, oh my goodness, I don't know what I need to do. See it as an exploration. Trust that you'll find the path. Don't worry about it. And everything you're going to experience, you'll learn from.
That's great. Trust that you'll find the path. On that note, that is the end of our Chatterbox section. I'm now going to ask you one more question, which we ask all our guests. And that is, if you weren't the chief executive of the McGrath Foundation, what would you be doing?
If I'm not talking about a holiday or a break, if I'm actually talking about my purpose, a few years ago, I actually defined my own personal purpose. I think it's really valuable as a leader to do that. And for me, my goal is to make sure I have an impact on people on a one-to-one and a one-to-many basis every single day. So that gives me the immediate as well as the long-term, which is very important. So I think if I wasn't doing this role, one of the things that I do right now is coach and mentor women leaders, particularly CEOs in for-purpose organizations. And I love that. And that has both that immediate as well as that long-term goal. But I've also just recently taken a position as a chair on a beauty brand, an Australian beauty brand, and I'm absolutely loving that too, going back to my old world and playing with product. So for me, I think it's going to be portfolio. This will be my last full-time job.
Board roles mainly?
Yeah, I think probably a mixture of board and working with CEOs and coaching them. I'm fascinated with the way people work and the decisions that they make and how they feel that they can optimize their impact. And if I can play a small role in asking the right questions, helping them unlock their potential, that just has huge value to me.
Wow. Well, I wish you all the best in your next portfolio career.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to it.
And on that note, Holly, our 15 minutes is up. Holly, thank you so much for coming in. I really loved hearing about the fact that you think long-term, and thinking long-term and having big, hairy goals does not frighten you. I love your advice to open every door, have every conversation. I love your advice also to not feel like you have to know where your career is going in your 20s and even in your early 30s. Relax, it will come up. And I love the fact that you've got your own private purpose, which will enable you to have the best life after you leave your current job, if and when that might be. So thank you once again so much for allowing us to spend 15 minutes with the boss.
Thank you so much. It's been so much fun.
And thank you to everyone for listening. If you like the podcast and you want to hear more, consider sharing the podcast or writing a review, as it helps us to reach more people. And follow us wherever you get your podcasts. At the Financial Review, we investigate the big stories about markets, business and power. For more, go to afr.com and you can subscribe to the Financial Review, the daily habit of successful people, at afr.com/subscribe. This podcast was hosted by me, Sally Patton, produced by Lap Fan and Martin Peralta. Our theme is by Alex Gower and our executive producer is Fiona Buffini.
The Australian Financial Review.